Okay, ¿cuántos moderadores y eso? ¿Tres? Okay. Entonces, ¿qué tal no, yo digo como mover.
Sorry, bad joke.
I just changed the rules. I'm sorry. Sorry. Good morning, buenos días. Welcome to the 34th Annual Spring Eap Symposium. And thank you for being here, and thank you in advance to the students for teaching us the new knowledge that you have discovered in your independent research projects. And Fede will officially open the symposium.
Thank you, Frank. Well, welcome again, everybody. As Frank said, this is the symposium of the EAP program. This is one of the part of the process of the students that have been developing their independent projects, and this presentation is one more step as an experience that they are suffering about how to do science and how to transmit science. There are some announcements to tell. El primer anuncio, si usted necesita traducción simultánea, en la esquina está Joyce con unos aparatillos que se colocan en la oreja y ella va a hacer traducción simultánea. Solamente tiene que tomar el aparato y encenderlo, colocarlo en el oído y puede escuchar la traducción. I'm saying that if you need simultaneous translation, just visit the corner. Joyce is very happy to welcome you there. Frank wants me to say that the restrooms are going outside and then to the right and then to the left. And if you are missing the way, you can keep on going to the forest. When you are speaking here, you can pay attention. You are in the screen. This is going to be transmitted. If we are asking the people to present, you can not be wearing masks here, kind of far from the rest of the public. We are going to be moderating the presentation that you are doing and taking the time for you. So when you are speaking and you see this sign of 5 means you have 5 minutes left. And then when you are speaking for 7 minutes, you will be looking this, 2 minutes left. So you know más o menos how is your timing. We suggest you to finish around the 9 in order to give time for questions. But you can play a little bit with that, and we could be kind of helping in that process, okay? Bueno, is there any other announcement to state? Okay. And remember to speak and project in your voice very well. Okay, the first session is about behavioral ecology, and our first presenter is Anthony Eap from UC San Diego. was the slide, and this is the pointer.
Okay. Wait. The red thing, the point.
The red spot is the pointer, so don't point it down. And this is to go.
Alright. So I did my study on the marathon usage of jump spiders on different kinds. So if you ever been around, like went outside, you've probably seen one of these guys around. And they're probably the cutest spiders we have on Earth. They are jumping spiders, and they belong to the largest family of spiders, Sulfurinae. Now, I had the pleasure of working with these two critters over my independent research project. So, and they were a pleasure to work with. And there's a couple things that are special about these guys is that one, they can jump, and two, they produce silk, but they do not build webs with the silk. Instead, they use that to assist in their mobility. Now, when jumping spiders jump, they will often spin a line of silk very fast, and that silk is attached to whatever they were on before they jumped, and this is called a drag line. And this drag line serves a couple purposes. First, it protects the spider in case they fail their jump and then they fall off. They catch this silk will serve as safety and catch them. Second, this also helps. There's studies that says that this also helps stabilize the spider in the air, allow them to orientate their bodies and decelerate better. And here is a video of the jumping spider, which is using the drag line on a vegetation. You can see my fall. Now, when I saw this, I was like, does this happen all the time? Meaning, do these spiders use the drag line every time they jump? Or is there circumstances or environmental factors that may influence their decision to deploy this drag line? And through further preliminary research, I found that it seemed like sometimes when they're on the ground or near the ground, when they jump, they didn't use the drag line. So my hypothesis was that drag line deployment frequency of these spiders increases as the height at which they perform the jump is increased. Now, so I went to, in May, I went to the Monteverde, not the Monteverde, but Station Biological in Monteverde, and I caught a couple of these spiders. They're the same morpho species. I couldn't identify them to the species, or genus, but they look the same and they're in the same area, so we consider them the same morpho species. And I caught 6 of them. 3 of them escaped, but I had 3 left, so that was enough to conduct the study. And so this is the experimental setup. I had a large glass terrarium, which is not for the spiders. The spiders were in their own separate terrarium. But this was for the experiment, so that they didn't just jump off the table and they had to climb up. So it was easier to keep track of when they could experiment. And here we have the PVC pipe, which I cut into various heights, so 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, all the way up to 7 centimeters. We had 2 of each, and then I had cardboard up here on top of the PVC pipe, which serves as a platform for the jumping spiders. And there's a 1 centimeter gap that the spider has to jump across. And to see the drag line, because they're very thin, I used a flashlight to see the reflection on the drag line and made it easier to see the drag line. So I found that the easiest way to do this is that because the jumping spiders want to climb up, I had a plastic container that angled upwards, so it attracted the spiders to jump across, and then I just switched it over to the other side, and it tricks them to jump back across it. Just do this 10 times, and every 10 times I raise 1 centimeter, and that's how I collected my data. Now here is the results, and here's the graphs. This first one is the drag line deployment frequency versus the platform height. So here on the x-axis we have the platform elevation from 1 to 7, and then here on the y-axis we have the drag line deployment frequency from 0 to 1. And as you can see with all the spiders here, the first spider number 2 and spider number 5, those were ones that didn't escape. They had a strong positive correlation when it comes to platform elevation versus driving deployment. As you can see, this line is angled upward. But for spider number 6, it had a very weak positive correlation, so the line is pretty flat here. So when I averaged the driving deployment frequencies for all the spiders, so I combined them and divided them by 3, I found that on average it still had a strong positive correlation between platform elevation and the driving deployment frequency. So these are the results: strong positive correlation between platform height and dragline deployment frequency. And I did a statistical test that told us that this difference was significant enough to where random chance cannot explain the results that we have. So, what does this study tell us? Well, first of all, it confirms that the spiders can gauge vertical distances, because if they weren't able to perceive vertical distances, then they wouldn't be able to tell they're higher up and therefore make a decision to produce their dragline or use their dragline more often. And we have studies showing that they perceive horizontal and vertical distance, and they use their excellent vision to do this, and they needed to survive. So, but another part that I didn't get to address in the study was that because they can also perceive horizontal distance, and it seems that they use dragline on platforms that they didn't really trust. It seems when they walked that maybe platform size or the texture of the platform, as well as the jump distance might matter as well when it comes to dragline deployment frequency, but I couldn't address that in this study. So this study is focused only on one morpho species, so we cannot really say that all jumping spiders have this behavior, and some jumping spiders or other species might show different behavior. And the study was a very short study, so there's a lot to be improved. For instance, I would have loved to extend the study and have more data. And another part is that because the study used the flashlight and the eyes, I could have made mistakes when it comes to seeing the dragline. The way I tackled this problem was by having a lot more data, and that would average out my error, because if I made the same amount of error on average on each elevation, then it should cancel out the significance of my error. And that was how the results went. And thank you.
We have time for questions.
Yes, Mariah.
You said that when you were doing your experiment, the spiders wanted to jump up. Do you know the reason for that and how you got
Well, one of the reasons I think is because I captured them and they wanted to escape. So I happened to a large terrarium where the only way to get out of it was up. So naturally, I think, and also I do think that spiders, jumping spiders, they like to climb higher up. A lot of times, that's why we find them. A lot of times at higher places. So yeah. Yes. Fine.
Okay, so I know that the spiders are very small, but I was wondering if any of the ones you captured differed in size, and if like the size corresponds with age, or might correspond like in the results.
Well, size would generally correlate to age, and spider number 5 and 6 were a bit larger than the spider number 2. However, this study, since we didn't really take into factor the horizontal distance, the size didn't really matter, but it could have been that maybe the bigger spider had an easier time jumping across the platform. However, most of the time when they jumped, they didn't really jump from the edge to the edge. They jumped from the edge to the middle or the middle to the middle. So, yeah. Yes, Henry.
Anthony, in the days of your study, sometimes you tend to say the spider is exhausted and cannot produce more silk, more well.
So
do you know how much do they take to recover, or why is this happening?
Well, usually takes time. Well, they have to metabolize more, but usually they spend their soap. And sometimes there was times where I just saw no grapevine in a lot of time in a row, and then I thought that maybe that spider then didn't have any because that would make sense for them to have so many, especially at higher elevations, where they would have so many times where they didn't use their grapevine. So I just let them rest and then try to do it again tomorrow or the next day after the rest.
Thank you.
Yes.
What kind of environment were you in where you were doing the test so they wouldn't escape? Like were you in a big room or you in a little box?
So we were in a lab that was quite a big lab at the lower lab, and the glass terrarium was like this. So I had the platforms in the middle. So if they were to jump off the platform, and they would have to crawl around and reach the edge of the glass to climb up, and that's usually where I could catch them before they got too far.
The way you feed them while you were keeping them in captivity.
So yes, I fed them fruit flies. Yeah, I fed them fruit flies that we caught, and that's how I kept them alive for like a week.
Nice.
Yes.
Two fast questions, Anthony. One, were you familiar with substances before coming to Costa Rica? And the second is, did you observe them placing a drag line and then got interested in this, or did you read about drag lines?
So I didn't know much about jumping spiders before I came on this trip, but for the drag lines, I actually saw a video of them doing that, and I also read that they use the drag lines. So that made me wonder if they always use it.
Gracias, Anthony. Catalina, I need your help to find your resume. This mic. Thank you. Our next speaker, Michael DeMarte from UC Santa Barbara. He said he was going to speak in Spanish, but he speaks twice and now it's welcome, Michael. Woo-hoo.
Hello, I'm Michael DeMarte, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on the spatial patterning of sea urchin Diadema mexicana in the subtidal zone. You may be wondering, why am I studying sea urchins? Out of all things. Sea urchins are in the phylum Echinodermata, which also include sea cucumbers, brittle stars, and sea stars. They are characterized by a radical radial symmetry, and they also have tubular feet on the bottom, which they use to move along the ocean floor. The reason why I got into this, was interested in studying sea urchins, because there have been instances throughout the world, in subtidal zones throughout the world, where sea urchins are growing in abundance and decimating habitats due to the decrease in their predators. They also have been known to migrate with the changing temperatures in certain areas due to upwelling, and the species Diadema mexicana inhabit the subtidal zones in Costa Rica. So here are the questions that I wanted to answer in my study. What is the kind of substrate that Diadema mexicana prefer to occupy? I looked at preference because I previously observed that they had been on both substrate or types of rock with holes and substrate that were flat. I also studied what kind of spatial distribution Diadema mexicana had at rest. So whether they aggregated together, whether they had random distribution, or whether they had uniform distribution. So here's part one of the methods. First, I marked 8 sea urchins with different colored beads so I could identify which one. And I took them out of the ocean, marked them, put them back in the same place, and put colored rocks in the spot that I took them out to have the reference point of their original site. With this, I recorded the distance that they traveled from their original site to their new site and the substrate type that they had inhabited when they moved. Here's a picture of how I did this. So here are the urchins right here, and then here are the reference points. So when the urchin would move and I came the next day to measure it, I would use a measuring tape to measure the distance from here and also record the type of substrate. So as you can see here in the photo, there are holes and then there are instances, there's substrate that is flat. I would also record that to get an idea of the kind of substrate that would be on. Here's part 2 of the methods. I use the 1 meter by 1 meter quadrat to count the number of urchins and record the number of holes in each square. There are 25 squares in the type of quadrat that I used, and each square within the quadrat was 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. Okay, and then here are the results. So with the marked urchins, I recorded, or I saw that the max distance was 5.6 meters, and the minimum distance that they moved was 0.2 meters. It just happened to be that the same urchin moved the most and the least. And from this, I saw that sea urchins traveled varying distances from their original locations. Also, when I recorded the type of substrate that I moved, or that I saw, this is day 0, so the day that I took them out and marked them. So, and then I recorded over the span of 2 more days. So as you can see here with the red and the blue, the red indicate when the sea urchins moved from a substrate that had holes to a substrate that was flat twice. They moved from a substrate that was flat to a substrate that had holes 3 times. And they moved from, there were 5 instances where they didn't change the type of substrate. They moved from flat to flat. So I saw that the sea urchins switched substrate types 5 out of the 10 times. Moving on to the data that I got from the quadrat. Here I have the number of urchins versus the number of holes to see if the number of holes was correlated with the number of urchins. The lowest, when there was 0 holes, they had the least number of urchins with 23 urchins, and the quadrant that had the most holes had 112 holes and 113 urchins. Along the x-axis here for clarification is the number of holes, and the y is the number of urchins. And then I had a correlation coefficient of approximately 0.69, which showed that the number of holes is moderately correlated with the number of urchins. So takeaway is more holes equals more urchins. Part 2 of the quadrat data, I did a statistical analysis to see the type of distribution that the sea urchin presented. The first test I used was the chi-squared goodness fit test, just to see if the sea urchins did not have a random distribution. And a random distribution is like this when there's no type of pattern, there's no way to tell if they are distributed in a way that makes sense. Compared to a uniform and a clump distribution where there's some kind of factor that would push them to have to either aggregate or pattern themselves in a specific way. The second test was the index of dispersion test, where I also saw that urchins are not randomly spaced, but this test, I was able to tell that the urchins did aggregate and they did come together. Going back to the following question, what is the substrate that Diadema mexicanum prefer to occupy? So I measured that the daily distance displacement, I measured the daily displacement of marked urchins, and I saw that the urchins moved varying distances from their original location. I also saw that the sea urchins switched substrate types 50% of the time. So sea urchins did not have a preference for prefer one substrate over the other. And moving on to the second question, what is the spatial distribution of Diadema mexicanum at rest? Well, I saw the number of holes was moderately correlated with the number of urchins. High number of holes equals high number of urchins. So, and there is clear evidence that the sea urchins aggregate. So what can I do with this kind of data what explains the findings that I have? I moved on to why and how. So sea urchins aggregate and choose, behave in this way due to the pressure of predators present, whether that there's food present in the area, or to increase the fertilization success. And then how are they able to move? So previously I said they have 2 of their feet on the bottom. They move depending on a different kind of stimulus. So a stimulus could be either a chemical stimulus given off by the chemicals in the water or pheromones or other chemicals seen given off by other urchins, or they're either temperature or physical type of stimulus, whether that be the temperature in the water or the wave strength or even the presence of predators. And I just want to say thank you to various people here. This is the This is my homestay family, Doña Paula and her family. Frank Joyce, who is amazing. My peers, Catalina Sutter and Nikki Lichter. And the Lara family, which are right here. And also my dad, who is a person in Guayaquil, who helped me with my project, set up my project and do this experiment. And I can do that.
We open the period for questions.
I thought putting the beads on the urchins is genius. I'm wondering where you got the idea to mark them that way.
So Frank showed me that there was a previous study done, I believe in 2009. I'm forgetting her name, but she also did this study where she marked, I think about 30 urchins to track whether they move throughout the night. And it shows that they do move a significant distance throughout the night and they graze throughout the night. It actually took me 2 or 3 times to actually mark urchins successfully. I tried it once and I couldn't find any the next day, so I had to do it another way. And I actually only found 5 out of the 8 urchins successfully the second time.
Did you hurt yourself?
I did, yeah. Sea urchins, different types of species of sea urchins are highly venomous. This species is moderately venomous, but once you get it stuck in there, you can't take them out, and it just hurts. Anthony?
Do you think that some of the urchins we modified?
Got what? I would. That is a possibility. I would assume that the strength of the waves either took the beads off, because I did find beads that were like on the ocean floor in crevices that were lost of the urchins they can find. It could be due to predation, but the only time I saw predation was when either we had gone by boat and an anchor probably knocked off a bunch of urchins, because there was a lot of urchins that were eaten and I couldn't see if there were any beads. That makes sense.
What depth did you conduct this study?
It wasn't that deep, maybe max, I want to say it was like maybe 10 meters, but I did it right off the coast, so it was like maybe 2 to 10, 12 meters.
So you said that you found in areas with more holes there were more urchins, but you didn't find that urchins preferred to be in the holes, right? So that just the areas with more holes had them, but it didn't mean that they were in the holes.
Right, so when I was doing the quadrant, I determined whether they had holes, which means that they were in substrate with holes, and then the one that had no holes was flat substrate. Yeah, so the aggregation I use, so they use holes for shelter, for protection against wave strength and predators, but when they can't occupy holes, they just aggregate in open space. So there was a lot of urchins present in the subtidal zone. So maybe in future studies, I can take more data to see whether or not they did prefer one or the other. But my assumption, which I did say in the presentation, was that they would occupy this limiting resource, which is a sheltered hole, and then go and aggregate. And it just happened to be that the urchins are in holes, so that when one leaves, they can occupy that space. And the ones that are either too big or can't, they aggregate. So just the areas with holes have more because there were more urchins to occupy that space. So, yeah.
Michael. So, there is time for one brief question.
Awesome study. Why should we care about urchins?
Interesting question. We should care about urchins because they are, in a lot of areas, their predators such as sea otters off the west coast or other marine mammals are disappearing. And so sea urchins just increase in abundance, and they completely decimate kelp forests and algae that are essential habitats and food for other species or other organisms in the subtidal zones. So they're creating ocean barrens, which is not good for us because we need those areas for like fish to grow that we eat, or not to grow up, so we can eat them. Yeah, there's been instances where they're just completely decimating subtitles and stuff.
Couple things to say. Please, everybody, when you are presenting, listen the questions. They could be very useful for your discussion or for something to add in your write-up. And the other thing that also you have noticed is some students choose the opportunity to visit from the field for developing their projects, and some of them, or most of them, choose the option for doing the project here in Monteverde. I don't have a map. Thank you, Catalina. So, and our next speaker also went to introduce Nikki Dexter from UC Santa Cruz, and she will tell us about the behaviors of birds in nesting. Welcome, Nikki.
So I studied the relative contributions and levels of parental care in streakback orioles and Icterus pustulatus during nesting period. So male parental care is pretty rare in most types of animals, but of the 10,000 plus species of birds, over 90% of them exhibit some level of male parental care. This care can be direct and include incubation or feeding of the young, or can be indirect, like nest building or guarding territory. Male parental care is more common in monogamous birds, which is like a one-to-one mating, and that could be because male time and energy is less split by mating and parental demands. And the extent of parental care affects the fitness of offspring and the parents, because increased parental care can increase survivorship and the value of their offspring, but it can also decrease parental reproductive fitness because they're spending more time and energy on their young. Birds vocalize for a lot of reasons, including communication between mates, deterring predators, and defending territory. And vocalizing can draw attention to the nest and increase risk of predation. So my two central questions were, one, what are the relative contributions of male and female streakback orioles? And two, how does male-female communication impact nest success? So the species I chose to study is the streakback oriole. They're very common birds that range from Mexico to Costa Rica. They're monogamous, again, that's that one-to-one mating, and they're very territorial birds. And they produce these very conspicuous pear-shaped nests that hang from the end of drooping branches. So they're very obvious, very easy to see. Both of these parents sing and may duet together, and one interesting thing is that females actually sing more frequently than males, which is pretty uncommon in a lot of species of birds. And you can differentiate them because the male has this really brilliant orange color on the breast and the back. This is a female on her nest. So what I did was I found, or I studied 5 nests around Bikini Keel, and I observed each nest for 8 hours, between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m., from May 10th to May 19th. I determined the stage of the nest as either building, incubating, or feeding. I changed the order and the time that I visited the nest so that I wasn't only observing like nest 1 from 8 to 9 because their behavior could change throughout the day. So during nest building, I found that males did not actually participate in nest building, but they did actively guard their nests and chase and harass predators. Males spent less than 40% of their time at the nest, while females spent more than 40% of their time at the nest throughout the stage. This graph is the amount of time that males spent near the nest during nest building. The y-axis is the percent of their time, and the x-axis is the date that I observed them, with the 3 nests being differentiated by color. There's a similar setup on the right for the time that females spend around their nests. As you can see, the females do spend quite a bit more time around their nests than the males. During incubation, I found that males did not incubate, but they continued to guard the nest and chase and harass predators. And on average, males spent about 38% of their time at the nest, and females spent between 40 and 87% around the nest. So there was a lot of range, but they did continue to spend a lot more time than the males. Oops. During feeding, actually both parents participated in feeding and foraging their young. And because of this, both parents were seen visiting the nest as opposed to other stages where only the female was present in and around the nest. The male and female actually did not visit the nest at the same time in any of my observations. They switched off. So throughout these stages, the amount of time that birds were willing to leave their nest unguarded decreased. They were willing to spend the most amount of time with neither parent present at the nest during nest building, and that amount decreased through building as they approached incubation. It was even lower during incubation, and in fact, in 67% of my observations in the incubation stage, the parents did not leave the nest unguarded at all. During feeding, the nest was not left unguarded more than 20% of an observation period, and the amount of time they left the nest unguarded decreased throughout observations during feeding. This is a graph from nest building towards incubation. Incubation, these nests began on the 18th, and as you can see, the amount of time in minutes that they left their nest unguarded decreased at all 3 nests. For communication, I found that females actually communicated from within their nests frequently. Nests 1 and 2 had higher rates of vocalization than nests 3, 4, and 5. Birds actually chattered when harassing and chasing predators away. And the frequency of calling decreased over time. So in nest building, there were higher rates of vocalization than in incubation or feeding stages. This is rates of vocalization across all 8 days of observation for each of my nests. So on the x-axis, we have each of the nests. The y-axis is frequency of number of vocalizations during a period, and each day is differentiated by shape and color. You can see that nests 1 and 2 do have higher rates of vocalization than nests 3, 4, and 5. This is an example of my frequency of vocalization charts for one observation period when a predator appeared, which is denoted by the hawk icon. And you can see that after the arrival of the predator, the frequency of vocalization, which is denoted by these stacking shapes, increased per minute until the predator left. So I did find that females spent more time at the nests than males at every stage, but males contributed by guarding their nests and chasing and harassing predators at every stage. The presence of males may, in addition to guarding the nest, allow females to leave their nests so that they can feed and forage. The time that the nest was left unguarded decreased over time, which could be because the cost of losing a nest is less than losing eggs or young, which the parents at that point have invested more time and energy in raising. Parents took turns visiting the nest, which is showing provisioning synchrony. So they're taking turns, which reduces sexual conflict. So it allows the female and the male to spend time out of the nest. And it also reduces the risk of predator attention because there's less activity happening at the nest. Males only enter the nest during feeding, which is because they only participated with the chicks when they were feeding them actively, but did not incubate or build the nest. At other stages, the males actually would not even land on the same tree as the nest, which I believe to be because of the bright coloration and reducing the amount of attention directed towards the nest. So females frequently call within their nest, and I believe that although that could draw attention from predators, it serves to call the male back to territory and also communicate when she's leaving the nest before she leaves so that the nest continues to be guarded. But it's interesting because these birds are very bright orange colored and their nests are out in the open. So it was an interesting finding to see that they were calling from the nest despite how like, look at me, the nests were. So females also called more frequently than males. I believe that's because the males would leave the nest for long periods of time. And so the female is left to guard her nest by herself, as well as calling the male back so that she can leave. Frequency decreased over the stages, which again, I believe is a function of the cost of losing the nest is lower than the cost of losing their eggs or young. So it's less risky to vocalize more frequently and draw attention during building stages. And birds chatter when harassing predators, and that is because, well, there's three possible reasons, and all of them could be true. It tells the predator that there's no element of surprise that they're attacking the nest anymore. Like the birds are aware that you're there. Another reason could be that they are also attracting the attention of other birds, potentially bigger birds that may be more useful in fending off larger predators. And the third reason is that these birds are making it as irritating as possible for you to come in and steal their nest or their eggs or their young. So the relative contributions of male and female streakback orioles. Males don't participate in building or incubation, but they do participate in feeding and nest guarding and deterring predators. And male-female communication could increase nest success by ensuring that there is always a parent nearby the nest to guard. Any questions?
How did you tell, because the nest is like, you can't actually see what's inside, how did you know what stage it was in, like building, feeding, or whatever?
So it's pretty easy to tell when they're building the nest because the female is leaving and coming frequently and she's bringing nest material, which you can see her holding in her beak. And while they're feeding, you can see both birds are going in and out of the nest. During incubation, the female will enter nests for extremely long periods of time before leaving. So when they stopped bringing nesting material and started spending increasing periods of time inside the nest, that's when I marked them as incubation.
And then,
Anthony?
What would be some of the predators?
So the predators that I saw magpie jays, I saw great-tailed grackles. Both of those are pretty common egg predators. And in one instance, I did see some type of hawk I wasn't able to identify that got in proximity to the nest, and the parents reacted to that. So larger birds, egg predators would be going after those nests.
So, the male didn't incubate at all, so were the eggs just left alone? Like,
Yes.
that's fine.
So basically, the eggs were left alone. During those periods, the female was never really gone for a long time. I didn't see her gone longer than 10 minutes, but they would leave the eggs just not covered because the male will not participate in incubating or enter the nest. While she's gone, he is nearby, so if something were to happen, he could defend, but he wouldn't incubate. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is just like, do you know anything about the general nesting success rate for these birds? Like, did you observe any nests, any pairs that failed to raise young because they were keeping up for any other reason?
So I didn't actually get the opportunity to observe any nests that weren't successful while I watched them. It was a short study, so it could have happened later on. And I actually don't know about the general nest success rate of the species. A lot of the research I did on the species was regarding to their communication or their coloring. There is a lot to be learned about streakback orioles.
Yeah, and about the predator defense, I was also wondering if you think it's likely that the male and female were also communicating with each other during the defense.
So during defense, what happened, in a lot of cases when the female participated, they would chatter back and forth. So I don't know if it was a measure of them communicating because they were both out in the open. They both saw the predator and they were chattering at the predator. I don't know, I don't have the data to prove, but they could actually call each other or communicate before the predator lands to like let them know, like, or when they start chattering, it could be like, that is alerting other birds and it could alert their mate like, hey, there's a predator here, I'm dealing with a predator. If that makes sense.
Thanks.
Any ideas about nests 1 and 2 that has a higher localization rates, just like the other variables that you
So,
consider?
sure, some of the variables that could also increase their rate of vocalization is nest 1 and 2 actually spent the longest amount of time in nest building. Nest 3 started in nest building, and nest 3 and nest 4 were mostly in incubation while I studied them, which could be an effect of them having lower rates of vocalization. And nest 5 was in nest building and then switched over to incubation a little bit sooner. But another thing, you know, I'm not really sure why they would have higher rates, but it could be that their location of the nest allows for them to call more frequently. So I'm not really sure, but there's a lot of possibilities.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you very much, Catalina, for letting us use your computer and all of this help. I am very bad with your glasses. Thank you, Yana, for helping us in the projection of transmission. Next speaker was Nikki, do you have the picture?
I don't have the clicker, but it's right. Okay, here. Sorry.
From UC Santa Cruz, Mariah Silva, she's going to let us know about mothers taking care of babies.
Thanks. My name is Mariah Silva. I am a huge fan of monkeys, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you all will be too. I spent my time in this independent research project studying the maternal behaviors of white-faced capuchin monkeys, also known as Cebus imitator. So I'd like to first begin by defining this term altricial. Altricial is the act of being helpless at birth and requiring parental care for some time. Most mammals and all primates come into this world kind of half-baked, and in order for all of the primate species that we know to continue to survive into adulthood, there is a critical period of time where like paternal or maternal care is required for the young of these species to develop into adulthood. And I thought that since this is such a critical time in the survival of these species, it was something worthwhile to be studied. And I am very fascinated by capuchin monkeys seen here in Monteverde, so that is where I chose to focus my project. So a little bit about capuchin monkeys. The white-faced capuchin monkeys here native in the regions of Central America above Panama usually forage in groups of about 10 to 20 monkeys, and they are arboreal, which means that they live in the trees, although they spend some of their time foraging on the ground. That is where they are located most frequently. The mothers of white-faced capuchin monkeys are very dedicated in the first 2 years of the upbringing of their children. They spend the first 6 weeks with the babies clung to their chest constantly. One of the fascinating things that I found in this subject was that capuchin babies don't actually hold on to the body parts of the mother, but they actually cling to the fur, which is something that you can see in this photo here, which is very impressive, I think. And so after 3 months, the babies usually transition from riding on the chest of the mother to the back, for ease of movement and to transition and wean off of the riding process. And a key part of maternal behavior is also teaching their young how to forage after they wean off from nursing. My central question was what are the types and frequencies of maternal behaviors that free-ranging populations of capuchin monkeys exhibit here in Monteverde, Costa Rica. This is, on the left, a picture of a mother capuchin breastfeeding her young. This area of study is somewhat known, but I thought that it would be beneficial to explore it more extensively here in Monteverde, because most of the research done on capuchins in general and also maternal behavior is done in areas like Guanacaste, where they are easier to observe, which was a little bit difficult for my project, but we'll get into that. So my materials and methods. I spent 12 days hiking around constantly to find capuchin monkeys. One of the difficult parts of this research project was that capuchins move, so you can't have them in one place and look at them all the time. I ended up having 7 sighting occurrences where I was able to collect data and from 3 separate locations. I want to give a thank you to both Stella's Cafe, the Bosque Eterno de los Niños, here at the Monteverde Institute, and the Curipancha Reserve, because these were all of the places that I cycled through daily to try and find capuchins, and these first 3 is where the 7 sightings were occurring. I took notes in a variety of ways. I first did something called focal continuous observation methods, which is basically looking at a monkey and writing down what it does. And I also kept voice recordings of the data that I gathered, and I used a scanning method to observe the behaviors of the rest of the troop. I considered each sighting as an independent group because I did not have enough time to see whether or not they were related or the same troop every time. This is the path that I took every single day, coming from my homestay family house and over here to the Monteverde Institute and the 4 other locations that I spoke about. Each monkey icon is a sighting that occurred, and the blue line is me walking, and the darker blue line is Federico driving me home. There are a few behavior categories that I want to highlight that I found in my results. One mainly is foraging. This is both something that was observed in mothers extensively and also the rest of the troop. Baby shifting on the mother's body and leaving the mother's body were examples of transitioning from dependent to independent locomotion. Nursing is a critical part of maternal behavior. However, unfortunately, in the study, I was only able to see 1 occurrence of a baby under 3 months exhibiting this behavior. And then I'll also talk about aggressive behavior seen in the rest of the troop and stabilization techniques used by mothers with small babies. So 5 mothers were observed in the duration of this study. I divided them into 2 groups, mothers with small babies that are under 3 months. You'll notice here that this is a different subspecies of capuchin, but I wanted to include this picture to describe the way that mothers with small babies carry their young, which is clutched to their chest. These mothers were seen to be nursing more frequently. They had their babies on the chest, almost constantly, unlike the mothers with larger babies, and they were seen using their tail for stabilization, unlike the mothers with larger babies. And mothers with large babies, older than 3 months, they were seen grooming their young more frequently. They were also seen foraging alongside their baby, not just foraging with them attached to their body. And the babies of this group also left the mother's body more frequently. Okay. Now, this is a really big graph, but don't freak out. The main things that I want to point out in this visual representation, on the bottom here, I have all of the behaviors that I collected data on and was able to parse through. And over here, I have average frequency. I ended up splitting up my data into 4 groups of capuchins. The first being lone adults, which are seen foraging and doing most of the aggressive behaviors that are physical. The mothers with small babies, mothers with large babies, and juveniles were both seen doing distressed vocalizations and baring their teeth in an aggressive way. But when it came to different behaviors like barking and breaking branches, that was mostly the lone adult males. Now, I want to talk about the importance of foraging a little bit. So capuchins spend like 70 to 80% of their time searching for food, which as a proportion of daily activity is gigantic. All groups were seen foraging during this study, and this is a critical point of teaching for mothers and their babies, so that the young, when they grow up and wean off from breastfeeding, have the ability to feed themselves and know what and how to eat in the complex diets that capuchins exhibit. Mothers with small babies were seen foraging at every encounter, but not with their baby. They were seen doing it by themselves. And again, mothers with large babies were seen less frequently foraging by themselves, as seen in this graph, but were shown to participate in teaching their young in the duration that they were studying. Another important point that I want to talk about is independent locomotion. So mothers carry their baby and breastfeed up until the baby is 2 years old, which I think is very interesting because capuchins give birth on a cycle of every 2 years. So if the baby is still breastfeeding and holding on to the mother, that makes it difficult for the survival rates of future offspring. So this timing is kind of sped along by the process of their gestation, but yes, it's beneficial for them to wean as soon as possible in this period. Small infants were seen shifting on the mother's body at every sighting. This is described as going from the ventral to the dorsal part of the mother's body or vice versa. However, that was not seen in mothers with large babies. And this shifting behavior, I think, is presumably the starting of the next phase in modal dependence. This is also a different subspecies of capuchin because I was not able to find images of mothers with babies on their chests, but this is an example of small infant stabilization, which was also seen in the field. Mothers with smaller babies usually use like one arm to hold on to their young, and there are 3 other limbs to locomote, and this is probably due to, if it's a primiparous or a mother with having a baby the first time, they might have inexperience holding infants, or the fragility of their young might be a factor in this holding behavior. Large babies were seen leaving their mother during 60% of observations, so that also is a clue to the age of them and the typical behaviors of older young. I have a video. I'll play the video. Here is an example of if this will play, here's an example of a mother foraging with her baby and then a juvenile coming to bite on the tail of the young baby. Here we are. Apologies. Okay. So here you see the young baby. This is actually a larger baby on the left, foraging through a fig tree at Stella's Bakery here in Monteverde. And then it climbs over to the right and uses its prehensile tail for stabilization. Very good job, monkey. And then it comes and climbs up and joins the mother's back as she goes up into the canopy. And then over here, you'll see a mischievous juvenile tugging and biting on the tail of the infant. Yep. Is it back here? Okay, wonderful, thank you. Now I'd like to briefly discuss aggression during the study. These are some of my favorite pictures that I was able to take in the field. One main example of aggression that typically lone males in the study were observed displaying is the breaking of branches and barking. So usually this is something that they do to ward off predators, and the force that they use to break off branches and allow them to drop to the forest floor is actually strong enough to decapitate snakes. And so it was a little daunting looking at this behavior in the field, but it was very fun. A specific instance of aggression of a mother was seen here on May 8th at the Monteverde Institute. There was a fight that broke out where a lone male in the group was seen like causing a disturbance, and he was getting chased out by the alpha. And during this time, the mother did not participate in any breaking of branches or like physical interactions like that, but she was shown baring her teeth, and her baby was also shown baring her teeth, which I thought was a very fascinating observation. And then also something that I lumped into the aggression during the study was there were a few examples of siblings tugging on the infant's tail, but it never seemed to be overtly violent, more just like sibling rivalry. The last thing I'd like to talk about in my observations was paternal interaction that occurred. So one of the most fascinating instances that happened during this study was also here on May 8th at the Monteverde Institute. After the fight broke out, there was a alpha male that approached the mother and baby combo that came up to them and gently touched the head and backs of like this pair. I was shocked by this because I had never seen or heard of in the literature of alpha males having calm, welcome, gentle, and brief touch with mothers and infants. But in further investigation, it was found that this behavior is actually quite normal, and infant-male relationships exist on a spectrum anywhere between like overtly caring to infanticide that can happen when males enter other troops. Yes. A lasting take-home message that I would like to impart to all of you is the effects of deforestation and the pet trade on capuchin populations. I read a study after doing all of my research about the psychological effects of having captive populations in limiting roaming areas because foraging is such a critical part of their daily activities. It can actually lead to a lot of stress and depression in captive capuchins because they're not able to, exhibit the behaviors that they would normally be able to do in the wild. This is also critical for mothers to be able to teach their young how to live in natural habitats and how to feed themselves and survive. Capuchin monkeys are considered a vulnerable species, and something that you can do to protect their populations is to do whatever you can to protect forest habitats and never buy a monkey. I would like to thank my homestay mom.
We have time for maybe one brief question because we are over time. But because this is the last presentation of the session, Maria is agreed to stay with us around and she can be answering questions. Drinking the phone. So, do you have any question? Yes.
Did you notice any like maternal infant or maternal offspring cues when they separated? Like mom saying, get off my back, or come back, or baby calling for mom, or anything that happened that kind of triggered them to come back together when they were separated?
So I did not notice any vocalizations, but it seemed to be very fluid and kind of unspoken when their separation and coming back together occurred. As we saw in the video, mothers usually like reconvene with their babies when they like began to move somewhere else. So I'm assuming that it is kind of like it's led by the offspring when it chooses to go off and forage. I did not see any examples of like mother capuchins like shoving off their babies. I think it was more called by like an initial like curiosity of the young capuchin to go and forage and monkey see, monkey do, kind of like exhibit the same behaviors that its mother have been doing. And then when the mother like leaves, baby gets cued to go back on, or it will get left behind.
Did you notice a lot of juveniles around mothers as well, like past two?
Yes, because I was doing more focal observations whenever I saw a mother with a baby, I had limited data on that because I was focusing on the mother-baby pair. But definitely in instances of grooming and when there was, that little bit of sibling rivalry displayed, that is, juveniles would be in the same area, definitely.
So after year two, they're not just on their own.
After what?
Year two, are they just on their own or like?
Yes, they stay relatively close to the mother up until the time that they're like sexually mature, which can be around like 4 to 6 years of age. But generally, they don't like have contact with the mother after that time. Yeah.
We're going to stop for a break, and then this is the ending of the behavioral ecology session. Come back, you are welcome to present, attend applied biology session. That's it, right?
Let's start again at 10:20.
Okay, please, 10:20, please.
Yes. Welcome back. There's a guardian angel in the back of the room who just reminded me to put on my mask. Thank you, guardian angel. This next section is called Applied Biology. The students who will speak now, like the previous students and following students, studied basic biology, but with a mission in mind to provide information that would be immediately useful to someone. And really very nice projects. Our first speaker, Catalina Suter from UC Santa Cruz, and also computer lender and technological whiz. We'll be talking about a small-scale mariculture project in Mahini Hill, and she has some observations on challenges and ideas for improvements of that project. Thank you, Catalina.
So yes, as Frank said, I did my project in mariculture module. So that is a mariculture module right there. It is a big giant net. And it's important because our oceans are suffering, especially because of overfishing. So that's an issue with fishing. And one solution to that is fish farming, which is called aquaculture. And when it's done in the ocean, it is called mariculture because it's marine. And it's done through modules, which are these big like nets shaped as hexagons and like pens that house fish. And the location of this one is in Bahia Tomas, which is the Tomas Bay in Monteverde. They farm spotted rose snappers, which is Janus which I will be referring to as spotted rose snappers. In Spanish, they're Paramos manchados, which directly translates to spotted snapper. And it's an economically important fish species that's very commonly here. And that is a Paramo manchado, or a spotted snapper. It has an eye hole, or it's like a moth eye right there. That's how you identify it. And these are silver as opposed to being rose colored because they're not fed the proper diet in this module. So some issues, there's a lot of challenges and issues with mariculture, specifically because it exists in the ocean, and the ocean itself is a very rigorous place to live. There's currents and things, there are red tides, which also cause poor visibility, and there's just poor visibility in general. There's an issue of them not eating during red tides, and during poor visibility events, there are fish collisions. A lot of like unwanted species swimming into the modules, as you can see over there. None of those are snappers; those are non-snappers, and they also eat the food that snappers eat. And that top picture is a red tide. Not sure if you can tell, but it is green water, not beautiful blue water. So some central questions I wanted to answer are: what are the relationships between water visibility, fish habits, feeding habits, and fish collisions? And then what are improvements we can make to the modules? So my methods were going out 6 days and collecting data by filming on GoPros. We lined them up on this module, on this one where their boat was. I fed them sardines, which is their diet. In this project, as you can see over here, there's a few pieces of sardine. My goal was to try and feed them in a way to reduce collisions, which involved only throwing a few pieces in, not a bunch, and concentrating them out in front of each camera. And I used about 3 cameras, so that's 3 different locations instead of feeding in just one. And the fishermen also record vertical visibility as part of their job duty. So once I had my footage, I looked for the number of falling sardine pieces, and that's what this photo demonstrates. This piece of falling sardine, there's no fish around. Those probably aren't going to get eaten. This was also during the red tides, the visibility was terrible for fish. The number of fish collisions during feeding, the number of sardines each fish ate or did not eat, and identifying fish in the modules because there are obviously one. And I've been asked a few times, why do fish collisions even matter? We do it as humans. Well, as a rugby player, I can tell you, a collision is not fun. of one of my feedings times. Yeah, we play it. So the snappers, like those red ones with the big dots, these are pilot fish, they're invasive. There's the grunts, also not invasive, but they're not welcomed. They're stealing food. Here's a snapper king. So, oh, there's a green jack. So yeah, as you can see, it's quite chaotic during eating. And this was during like one of the best visibilities I had. Okay. For my results, I did them based on the module. There were 2 modules that I studied. This is the 3rd module, which has the most amount of snappers. There are about 40 in here. So they are the biggest population of fish in there. And I did little pictures to help. And what I found was that the water visibility, when it's greater, so is the rate of eating is greater because they can see. And when it comes to collisions, there's like a weird trend here that goes like down and up. So during poor visibility and during great visibility, there are more collisions, probably because they can't see, and also because they can see food. So that's quite interesting. This is for the 4th module. It has about 10 snappers and a lot of unwanted species, specifically jacks. There is no relationship between water visibility and the capture rate. As you can see with the colors, there's just not really a pattern or a trend. And before I forget, the 2 other fish, there's a grunt, this one right here. That is like the other most common species in the module, and this is the green jack that is also very common and very fast. Steals a lot of food. And yeah, that's the food capture rate. And then in terms of collisions and visibility, we see this like little trend again where poor visibility, excellent visibility have high rates of collisions. So as I mentioned, there are 40 snappers in the 3rd module. There are 10 in the 4th module. At one point, there was like 4 during the red tide, and then they were replaced, thankfully. There are 13 total species living in these modules, which is unfortunate. We only have 1 snappers. Water visibility does impact food capture, at least in module 3. In module 4, I think there needs to be more collection, more looking at things, because visibility, there's bad visibility in the ocean, there's bad visibility in my data, which is hard. And water visibility does affect collisions in both modules at poor and high visibility, water visibility. Some improvements for the modules would be removing all non-snapper species, everything that's stealing, that's feeding, cut smaller sardine pieces, and pieces without bones or pieces without heads and tails, because those are things all fish didn't like. They never wanted to eat these bones, whatever. They were too big. Also, when the sardine pieces fall and they're like wasted, it collects at the bottom of the module. It gets really dirty. Other fish try to get in. Other organisms try to get in, like crocodiles have been known to try and like rip apart the modules and get in, which is obviously very bad. Cleaning the modules more frequently might help with visibility, just better light quality for the snappers, just better hygiene. And using nets with smaller holes so other fish cannot get in. And I would like to thank a few people for my study. Frank Joyce, who not only advised me, but let me use his mariculture project. The Lara family, which is in here, they drove me out every day to help me tie knots, do things I could not do. The guys who work at the mariculture project, there's Wonka, who's right there. Wonka, his name usually goes by. Very helpful. We had to fish some jacks out one day, so that's him. Jack, my homestay family, the Velasquez Blancos, who unfortunately are not here today. Michael Marte, who helped me quite a few times with diving down, fix my GoPros, and the Instituto Monteverde for allowing us to be here.
Do you think having the mariculture project located in in a different place from the bay would help, like with effects of red tide, or does red tide affect like everywhere?
Red tide can affect any place in the ocean, like that's just fact. But I think the bay is, Bahia Tomas is more susceptible to red tide, so a different location would be like a game changer in my opinion. But to do that, you have to get permissions and go through a lot of steps. But yes, in a perfect world, like moving it from there would be awesome. Also, because the bay is like a half circle, so things get stuck.
Yeah. Why did you feed them sardines?
So they get fed sardines because that's like the food of choice for this project. But sardines because that's what snappers eat in their natural environments. They tend to eat carnivorous fish, so they're crustaceans, like other fish like that. And your options are really sardines or like artificial food pellets with soy, which is not natural fish. Yes.
How did all the other species come in while the groupers can't get out? And do they get out?
The snappers? No. They
Yeah, the
don't.
snappers, sorry, yeah.
The
So how they can't get out, but other fish can get in?
Yeah, so the snappers are, I mean, I'm assuming when they're young, they could totally get out, but since there are bigger ones in there, I'm assuming they want to stay in their families. I'm not really sure of like familiar behavior of snappers. That was my study, but I'm assuming they want to stay in. But if they do get out, I mean, if they do get out, there's nothing you can do. But when the other fish that are not snappers are young and small enough, they can easily get in the module, and that's an easy source of food for them. They don't have to do much or exert a lot of energy into feeding, so they tend to stay.
What is your opinion if they try to keep them alive, sardines, instead of people?
That would be interesting. I don't know enough about wild snappers. Yeah, but I'm not sure of that. Do you have a question?
What in their natural diet, you said that they are differently colored in the modules versus when they're wild. Is there something because of their diet? Is that correct?
Yeah, so the most common thing they eat, according to a study I read, is crustaceans. And crustaceans tend to be red colored like shrimp, krill, and things like that, so they get their color from those things. And since we're only feeding them sardines in the modules, they obviously don't get that color because sardines.
Do you think that color could impact the amount of times they're colliding with each other? They can't see each other as well?
That's very interesting. I'm not sure. I'd have to look back because after the red tide, a few wild snappers were introduced again. So I would have to see like how that is affected. But they do tend to avoid collisions like in pairs. Like a couple will go at it and they'll like do this like weird turn like this. So I don't know. Color helps, but that is.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. Our next speaker is Jenny Sue from UC Santa Cruz, and she's going to be telling us about her project looking at ants as biocontrollers of a coffee bean pest.
Before I start this presentation, let me ask you, how many of you had a coffee today? Just raise your hand. And how many of you know what a coffee berry board is? Keep them up. How many of you know what a coffee berry board is? Without me telling you. So, only Frank. Unfortunately, coffee berry borers are one of the most prominent pests in the coffee industry. They're these tiny beetles that are about 1.4 to 1.78 millimeters, and they'll just bore right inside the fruit. They'll eat the fruit, the berry, and completely destroy them. And in the coffee industry, people actually can't control these pests because they're just really difficult to get into. And they've tried different ways. One of them is a fungus, and that's one of the pictures here. they're supposed to target these pests. And this is kind of like the standard convention that they use in the coffee industry. Another is to use this parasitoid wasp that's native to Africa, since coffee originally is from Africa. And another is to incorporate these kind of mixtures of agroforests where they use shade to grow up or kind of grow with the coffee, and they plant different things to hopefully encourage ecosystem services. One of these ecosystem services is predatory ants. And these predatory ants were from different countries, in Mexico specifically, Guadalupe, Araucana, and Aztecas rhesusor is a very common ant. And in Puerto Rico, there actually is an ant called Solenopsis invicta, and also Guadalupe Araucana, but these are fire ants, which means they're super tiny, and during coffee picking season, if they're high in abundance, pickers are not going to be happy about that. So in Costa Rica, I'm asking the question, do ants control coffee berry borer abundance in Costa Rica? And if they do, what species are controlling these coffee berry borer abundances? And what size do these coffee berry borers prefer? Since there hasn't really been many studies done in Costa Rica. In my study, I looked at a coffee farm in Canitas in the Guanacaste province in Monteverde. It's called Finca Life. And I had two plots. One of them is, well, they're both within about 50 meters from each other because there's a very small area that's growing coffee right now in the proper size because coffee actually just bloomed within the past 3 weeks. So they're either really tiny fruits or fruits are non-existent at the moment, except for this particular plot in the farm. And I went around collecting berry, and you can actually see them. There's a very prominent hole in the same part, usually around that little brownish area of each berry. There's a hole, and that's usually when coffee berry borer goes. I would take each fruit, dissect them, and then measure the size of the borer holes. And then for about 1 hour in each plot, I walk around collecting every single ant I saw, and I put them in a vial of alcohol because I need to identify them to see what species they are. And then I did an ant coffee berry borer predation experiment in a plastic bag where each bag I had 4 berry borers and about 4 to 6 berries. And I also put a leaf in there to maintain moisture, and then I put the ants based on morpho species, which I had 8 treatments because it's impossible to tell the ants exactly what species it is by looking at it without looking under a microscope. So I also calculated the borer fruit proportion after 36 hours of leaving these ants and borers in there. And a proportion of 0.75 means 3 out of 4 fruits are bored. A proportion of 0.25 means 1 out of 4 fruits, and so on and so forth. So I measured them based on, afterwards I actually got all the ants out of bags, identified them all to species, and averaged them out based on bored fruit proportions. And that's how I got most of my data. But I also did an ANOVA test, and I calculated Shannon diversity and the H max value. And these are 2 ants I found, which are relatively interesting because there's these 2 ants are in the same genus in different morphospecies because, well, these ants, one of them actually had a very high proportion rate, and the other actually is a very good controller of these coffee berry borers. These are some of the ant species I found. The most common ones I found were Eap Symposium, which is kind of a medium-sized black ant. And there's Phaedolia constricta and Brachymergus patagonicus, which are the most common ants. And these ants, the numbers up underneath them means I caught 63 ants in total, 21 of them just happens to be Lunapithina anipium. And the most interesting thing about these ants is that one of them, or the majority of the common ones, are actually seen as common pests in disturbed habitats. So I also calculated them based on different sun and shade in each plant. So a sun coffee plant is the one that's in complete sun, whereas a shade coffee plant is the one that's in the periphery or the edge of the plot where it's partially covered by shade at some point. So it might influence the different ant species compositions. And we found that Phaedolia constricta was actually the one that's in common, whereas shade species had 4 ants and some species had 3 ants. And the Shannon diversity value just basically says exactly how diverse is this plot. And I calculated them for sun and shade, which kind of evens out to 11 species in total. And these are the results of my predation experiment. Each dot actually represents a different species. So, for example, breaking mermaids, there's 2 species, one of which is really good and one of which is not as good. And the error bars, you can't really see some of them, they're really tiny because they're averaged out to be the same, but Solenopsis has a huge error bar because one of them it did okay, and then the other one did a really good treatment, so it averaged out to be about 0.33. And this is the proportion of board fruit sizes in experimental fruits and field fruits. So in the field, I found a normal distribution where they tend to prefer fruits that are around 16 to 19 millimeters in length, whereas in experimental fruits, I selected these fruits based on 5 millimeters to about 20 millimeters, and they tend to prefer fruits about 12 millimeter size, which is also very interesting though, but could be due to the fact that they have limited resources. In my study, I found that certain ants are very good at controlling these coffee berry borer populations. Specifically, the small black marble species, which I counted as Brachymermex patagonicus and Solenopsis akea. And the Brachymermex genus actually has 2 species, like I said before, one of which is really good, one of which is not too good. But the important thing to take in there is that Brachymermex is a territory or an invasive species where it's native to South America. And in Costa Rica, they actually nest in disturbed habitats, so like farms or places where there's buildings, they will nest under rocks. And some improvements that we could do is sample coffee at a different time. According to coffee farmers, coffee is actually peak season in September and October, where hopefully there's red fruits or at least more green fruits where there are more of these coffee berry borers. And also sample them according to ant colonies and not just ant individuals, because when they're isolated in environments, they might be stressed and they might not act as they normally would. And also increasing connectivity with ants by adding strings. So since all these ants are arboreal, which means they're on trees, connecting these trees with strings can create different pathways for these ants to cross and potentially increase predation. And also for farmers, preserving habitat/nesting materials, like including twigs or rotten wood, will help these ants be happier and protecting these coffee berry borers, and of course, limiting the use of insecticides. And thank you very much for all these people that made my
Bethany.
So when you were doing your project, did you find any ants that you couldn't identify the species or seen?
No, because all the ants I didn't identify the species. Frank messaged Jack Longino, and she came here on Saturday and helped me identify most of the ants.
Other questions? I have one. Do your observations suggest that the ants actually do catch and kill the borers, or do they simply spread them and the borers need a particular coffee brand or plant?
It's impossible to tell with my study because I left them alone for 36 hours, so I don't really see any direct predation where ants will go inside the fruit, but in previous studies and in literature, it's been documented that certain species, like particularly fire ants, will actually go inside the fruits and kill them.
Okay, one more question? Okay, yes, Maria?
Are there any other incentives for the ants to go to the coffee plants other than the possibility of being able to eat these coffee berry borers?
So yes, ants have a mutualistic relationship with scale insects or anything in Calyptra, or especially like aphids. They produce honeydew, so they attract a lot of ants. And sometimes you'll see honeydew there and they'll actually protect the aphids even though they're pests, so it's kind of a little bit of both.
Are any of these species like leaf cutter type of species that maybe farmers don't want because they might do damage to the crop?
So yes, I did find leaf cutter ants, and there was a colony, a really big colony of leaf cutter ants, but I excluded it because they don't really do much in terms of predation. Their leafcutter ants actually cut the leaves and they use it to grow their own fungus. So they don't really do much predation on these spores.
Thank you, Jenny. We're going to move right into another session. Don't go in.
Okay, so I get to introduce our third and last session, which is on plant biology. And our first talk is going to be given by Claire Russo from UC Berkeley. And it's about leaf morphology in pollen.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire, and like Naomi said, I'm going to be talking about the factors that influence leaf morphology for a cloud forest palm. This one is Genoma burnessii. So, before we start, I want everyone to think about a leaf. Any leaf, just think about a leaf in your mind. What shape is it? What size is it? What color is it? Visualize this leaf. Does it look anything like any of these? These are some of the thousands of different morphologies that leaves can have. So leaf morphology is the shape of a leaf. So morphology can be long and slender, it can be compound, it can be many different things. And these shapes are not stagnant over time. They actually can change in response to factors. So some factors that they change in response to are light exposure, humidity, elevation, different things, rainfall. And the fact that they change, that is termed leaf plasticity. So really what I'm talking about today is the leaf plasticity of Genoma burnessii. So Genoma burnessii is a palm located in cloud forests nearby. So they were found between 1,000 and 1,600 meters. This is taken right next to the Estación Biológico, right near where they're found. They are endemic to Costa Rica, and specifically in the Tiburon and Central Mountain regions, which means you will not find them anywhere else in the world, only here. Why I'm interested in them is because their leaf morphology is very unique based on all my observations. So, I collected leaves. First I was hiking, I saw that they vary so much, so I collected leaves and I took photos, and I found that there are symmetrical and asymmetrical leaves. The symmetrical are, starting here, we have 2 leaflets, 4 leaflets, and 6 leaflets. So this right here is the center vein, this is the rachis. And you have 1 leaflet on either side, this one you have 2 on either side, and 3 on either side. As you can see, they're symmetrical, they're the same on both sides of the rachis. Then I found some that were asymmetrical. So we have 5 leaflets, 5 and 7. They can get up to 15 leaflets per leaf, which is quite a lot. But even among the ones that are both 5, you can see that the orientation is very different of the leaflets. So this whole thing together is 1 leaf, and each one of these is a leaflet. So that led me to my questions, which are, why is this happening? Why is there so much variation in the leaves I was finding? So I have a number of leaflets, that's what I want to know what was being affected, and these are all the variables that I was considering. So first, I was considering crown width, and then crown height. So crown width is the actual width of the whole plant from tip of leaf to tip of leaf. Crown height is the same, it's from the bottom of the stem as it meets the soil up to the top of the highest leaf. Stem circumference, that's below the lowest node. Number of leaves of the whole plant. Percent canopy cover, so that's how much sunlight is actually reaching the plant. And the elevation. I also decided to use very similar variables to determine if it had any effect on bilateral leaf asymmetry. So again, this is the rachis. Bilateral leaf asymmetry will mean left and right side asymmetry. So these ones are symmetrical bilaterally, these ones are asymmetrical. And I did the same variables, except I added one, I added leaflet asymmetry. So leaflet asymmetry is when the number of leaflets on either side is not symmetrical. So this would be a leaflet asymmetry of 1 because it's 3 minus 2. Same with this, 1 and 1. So my methods were, first I had to locate the species. I used Eladio's help for this. He's the expert, and we were able to identify and locate a number of these Genoma burnessii. And then for each plant, we measured the elevation, the percent canopy cover, so again the sunlight, number of leaves, stem diameter, canopy width, and canopy height. And then for each leaf, for each plant, we picked up 6 leaves to measure, 2 from the top, 2 from around the middle, and 2 from around the bottom, just to get some variation in our measurements. And we measured right here what you see. So this line right here is the radius, we measured that. We measured this, which is the primary leaflet, so the size of the primary leaflet, the length. We measured the number of leaflets, so here we have 2. And then we measured the space in between, which is a little space right here. If they were symmetrical, we only measured for the left side. If they were asymmetrical, we measured both sides, so we could calculate the symmetry. Results, so first we used RStudio, or I used RStudio to calculate the multiple linear regressions to figure out if there's a correlation. And I also calculated leaf asymmetry using the area here. So basically I would do radius minus the length of the space in between to get the length of the total leaf area for one side, multiply it by this length, and that would give a rough area of the left side. And then I would do the same for the right. If it's symmetrical, the difference is 0, but if asymmetrical, then we go to value. So total, I collected 3,380 measurements, which took quite a lot of time. Eladio helped with all of that. 48 plants in total, and we measured 282 leaves. Of all of the leaves we measured, 56.25% were asymmetrical. So of the 282, 153 were asymmetrical, so more than half. For all the plants we measured, almost 90% had 1 or more asymmetrical leaves. So that means only around 10% were fully symmetrical in all the leaves. The max number of leaflets we found was 8 for one side, so 15 total for the whole plant, or for a whole leaf. And the maximum elevation was 1,750 meters. So, do they correlate? This was the question, and we got an answer. After doing the regression, we found that number of leaflets, stem circumference determines or correlates with number of leaflets. So this positively affects number of leaflets, which means as stem circumference increases, number of leaflets also increased. We found for bilateral leaf asymmetry that as crown height increased, so did bilateral leaf asymmetry, same for leaflet asymmetry and elevation. So why might this be? Question 1 was if number of leaflets is affected by anything. We found stem circumference affects number of leaflets. This could be due to, okay, this is a German word, called, or it's pronounced Erstarkstum, Wachstum, or something. It means strengthening growth. It basically means that as stem diameter increases for a plant, specifically monocots, more so monocots than other plants, that leaf size and complexity increases. So if leaf size and complexity increases, it makes sense that the number of leaflets also increases. For the other question, whether what affects bilateral leaf asymmetry, we found crown height, leaflet asymmetry, and elevation affects bilateral leaf asymmetry. So again, crown height, just like stem circumference, crown height also is a part of Erstarkungswachstum, and so again, leaf complexity and size corresponds to higher crown height. So the taller the crown, the more variation there is in the leaf, and so then this could be deduced that it's also asymmetrical. Leaflet asymmetry affecting bilateral leaf asymmetry can be explained by the total area of both sides, and then I was not able to find any reason why elevation could affect bilateral leaf asymmetry, so this is unclear and could be studied in the future. My conclusions, stem circumference affects number of leaflets, so we found that. We found that bilateral leaf asymmetry is affected by crown height, elevation, and leaflet asymmetry. So these are all correlations that are statistically significant. For further study, when we were examining these plants, there was a lot of very slight crossover or very similar morphology of the plants, and so it's a little bit unclear if we were studying more than one species perhaps, or one species that was sort of going into 2 species. There's I think 3 studies total on this species overall, so a lot of information is lacking. So if a taxonomist came and examined these, that would be great. Also, elevation and leaf asymmetry correlations, still no idea why this happened. That'd be another great area to study. And another thing that could have been done in this study or for a future study that we weren't able to do is there's actual like asymmetry index that can be used to measure asymmetry. That gives a very precise number, more precise than what we found, so that could have helped with our calculations. Okay, I'd like to thank Eladio Cruz and Nicole for all of his help. Hay una cosa que me asusta, que me asusta y es, son insectos. Y Eladio me ayudaba mucho porque cuando medíamos las plantas y había insectos, él hacía todo y no podía hacer sin usted. Muchas gracias. Y también thank you to Federico for being so kind and knowledgeable and helpful wherever you are. And thank you for Naomi for everything, for all the answers, all the questions, all the time. Okay, that's all. Any questions? Or what are your questions?
So, for the area measurements, for the asymmetrical leaves, which side normally has more area, the one with more leaflets or the one with fewer leaflets?
The one with fewer leaflets has more area. Yeah, that's what we found. So, or what I found. So this side, the left side here, would have a greater area than the right side. But yeah, we took it basically was the absolute value. So at the end, it didn't matter which side, like left or right, was greater. We just found the difference between them. Yes.
Do you think there's a purpose for the asymmetry?
It was a little bit unclear. One thing I found in my research is that a lot of plant, like leaf plasticity, has to do with, like I mentioned, like a bunch of factors, external factors like light and other things. So it's possible that they're adjusting to micro abundances, like micro differences in light, versus like one whole plant could be different from a whole other plant, but that's like expected because they're in different spots. But even if one little spot in the canopy is exposed to one side of one leaf, then it could cause that, although it's a little unclear. Yes?
How consistent do you think their volumes are when it comes to leaves and other volumes?
In other what?
Volumes, like not necessarily rainforest, but like maybe tropical climates or other tropical climates or even seasonal climates.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the concept of the German long word, that applies to more than just in cloud forests or tropical rainforests. So that has to do with leaflet complexity or leaf complexity. So asymmetry could also be explained by that and other like life zones. Although this plant is only here in these cloud forests. So in terms of this plant, I don't know, because it wouldn't be located elsewhere. Any other questions?
Okay, our next speaker is Hannah Hosh, and she's going to talk about herbivory in ferns and angiosperms.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Hannah and I go to UC Berkeley with Claire. Like Naomi said, I'm going to be talking about differences in herbivory between angiosperms and ferns in Monteverde. So just to start off, if anyone is unsure about what herbivory means, it's basically the consumption of plants by animals, and this process is really important in ecological functioning in many ways. So for my study, I wanted to focus in on herbivory of these two plant groups, ferns and angiosperms, both of which are super abundant in Costa Rica. There are over 800 species of ferns here and over 9,000 of angiosperms in Costa Rica. And so ferns are non-flowering plants, while angiosperms are defined as flowering plants. And ferns reproduce using spores. So on the underside of the leaf, or what is called the frond, are groups of spores, and that serve as their reproductive structures. So this whole frond is what you see here, and the part with all of the pinnas, which are these parts, is referred to as the blade. and the tip of the frond is the apex. I'm not going to focus in on angiosperm anatomy just because it's so diverse, and I focus more on ferns in my project. And so the reason I wanted to answer the question of do levels of herbivory differ between these two groups is because during preliminary research, I found a lot of inconclusive studies regarding this topic, and a lot of scientists have said, well, it's possible angiosperms experience more herbivory since they have flowers, but we really don't have enough concrete evidence to back up that claim, and I found that same statement in many studies. So I really wanted to investigate, do these two groups of plants experience different levels of herbivory? And these pictures are just to show you what herbivory could look like on each of the two plants. So for my materials and methods, I chose to focus my research on two areas. One of the areas was the Sendero Principal, which is right next to the Estación Biológica, and the other area is the road that goes right to the station. And so basically what I did is I went to the Sendero Principal, I found 30 ferns, and for each fern, which was in about a 2-meter area, I randomly selected 10 angiosperms, and then of those 10 angiosperms, I chose just 3. So for each of the areas, there were 4 plants, 1 fern, 3 angiosperms, and I measured on each frond or leaf of an angiosperm how much of the surface area was missing using an herbivory index. So I measured 0 to 25% missing, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75 to 100. So on the road to the station, there were 30 ferns, 90 angiosperms, and same for the Sendero Principal, there were 30 ferns and 90 angiosperms. So just to make it a little more clear, this is what the herbivory index was. I'm not going to go through all the variables because that's a little monotonous, but it basically just wanted to calculate how much of each pinna or frond or leaf was missing due to a herbivorous predator consuming it. And if there were kind of ambiguous pieces missing, I just decided to call that herbivory even though it might not have been. And this is the scientist that established the equation. So here are my results. As you can see on the Sendero Principal, which was the trail next to the station, there was a higher herbivory index for angiosperms of 1.13, and the index for ferns was a bit lower with 1.04. And for the road to the station, the angiosperm index was a little lower than the fern index. So as you can see, the two areas experienced almost exactly opposite results, which I found interesting. And then I just generalized the two plant groups to look at the data in a different way. So angiosperms was very, very slightly higher in herbivory index than ferns overall, even though one of the two areas had the opposite results. So in terms of discussion, just to reiterate, the Sendero Principal had higher herbivory index for angiosperms, while the road to the Estación had a higher index for the ferns. But overall, angiosperms had a very, very slightly higher index of herbivory. But it was so slight that there wasn't really a clear trend in the data that pointed to the idea that angiosperms definitely experience vastly more herbivory than ferns, or the other way around. So many environmental factors could have determined my results and results in other studies regarding these two plant types. The road to the station is really open and there's a lot more sunlight, which influences what types of predators are around, herbivores, what plants can thrive, photosynthetic and transpiration processes, and many more occurrences. And forest cover on the trail and in other regions influences sunlight as well, and what species can thrive or not thrive in those regions. And fragmentation has been shown to really disrupt ecological connectivity and important processes that allow interactions between types of organisms. Additionally, I did find some research on how car exhaust might have impacted my study. Basically, some fumes in car exhaust have been shown to disrupt the cognitive abilities of certain insects, such as honeybees. So if some insects on the road to the station are in that region of car exhaust, maybe they're not able to feed on the same types of plants as on the Seminole Principal, which is a region where there isn't much car exhaust. There are many other environmental factors that could have played a significant role in my study. Chemical defenses are a huge region of research for botanical studies because some plants release certain chemicals called volatile organic compounds that basically signal, okay, certain organisms should come to feed on the herbivores that are threatening me. So a plant might send that signal and an organism comes and eats the insect that's eating themselves. So ferns, most species of ferns, such as bracken ferns, lack this chemical defense. So they're unable to use it to fend off the herbivores. While angiosperms, most of them have certain VOCs, which are called alkaloids, that they can use to fend off herbivores. It's also possible that different types of insects feed on ferns versus angiosperms. I didn't personally witness this, and I've only researched this some and haven't found super conclusive data or results. But it's possible that in future studies, that could be a huge area of research to look at, okay, what insects are eating each plant group. Also in future studies, honing in on specific species of ferns and specific species of angiosperms might tell more conclusive or specific data about the two plant groups. It's also probable that seasonal variation plays a huge role in plant and insect relationships, since weather varies a lot seasonally. And types of herbivores obviously vary a lot from many different types of insects and mammals and birds, etc. And then moving forward, I think climate change has already become a huge topic of study with this, because when the climate changes, vital ecological interactions are greatly disrupted. So if there's a warmer climate or there's more rain, things like that could really be important for future studies. And many thanks to Naomi, my primary advisor. She helped me a lot when I didn't want to collect data with many other things. Federico Chinchilla helped me find the herbivory index that I needed and helped in many ways. Frank Joyce also advised me a lot. Luisa Vega was my homestay mother. And Laurel helped me learn how to use Excel at a much more advanced level. And thank you to all the other students and staff with TCU.
Any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that the difference between the herbivory index score between ferns and the angiosperms were very minute. Have you thought maybe do you think could have done a statistical test to see if the difference between them were significant based on the data?
A t-test?
Yeah.
I actually did do a t-test. I didn't include it in the slideshow.
And was it not significant?
Not between the two groups of plants.
Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, how did you choose which plants to look at? I don't remember who said that.
Oh, so that was definitely an area of like subjectivity, but basically when I was walking and I found enough ferns, I was like, okay, here's some ferns. And then I used an app on my phone to randomly select, say if there were like 5 ferns, I would put in 1 through 5 and randomly choose one.
Okay, cool.
I recognize that you didn't necessarily include this in your study, but I'm curious to know what your impression is with respect to the influence of species on the herbivory level. Because you mentioned, first off, that there are close to 1,000 species of ferns in Costa Rica and almost 10,000 species of angiosperms. Is it based on your impression, an important thing, the effect of species on herbivory level?
That's a really excellent question. Obviously, with so many species, I wouldn't have witnessed all of them. But I definitely noticed that certain species or types of ferns their herbivory looked a lot different. Same with angiosperms. So it's probable that they play different roles in like herbivory and other interactions. But I think that'd be, like I said, studying singular species would be really telling and be a great area to study for going forward.
Thank you.
Did you read that it's advantageous for the ferns to have any insects eat them, like because they eat the spores? Do they actually disperse the spores? Do you think? They would want to have something to eat them?
So I'm not sure if any herbivorous insects could disperse spores. My assumption, based on what we've learned in our classes during this program, is that herbivory wouldn't be advantageous for ferns just because it takes a lot of energy and resources to regrow yourself if you are eaten. So that would be my assumption, but again, that would be really interesting to look more into if herbivores can disperse spores or anything like that.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Samara Fruman, and she's going to talk about transpiration rates in melatonin. Okay, oh wait, my mouse. My presentation is on the effect of vein density on leaf transpiration rates in 3 different species of Melissomatation. So, transpiration is the process in which water evaporates through stomata of leaves. And this happens because stomata is surrounded by guard cells, and it'll either be open or closed depending on different environmental factors. And also the water that gets to the leaf comes from the roots, and it goes up through xylem, and it gets to the petiole and goes through the leaf through their veins. So when I was hiking around, I saw Melissomatacea leaves, and I thought that their venation pattern was extremely interesting. This is Anthony and I looking at leaves. And I'm just like obsessed with the pattern of these veins. So I decided to study the effect of these 3 species of Melissomatacea and how maybe transpiration rate could be affected by that. And Mariri is a very interesting genus in Melissomatacea because it doesn't have the characteristic 3 to 7 primary veins that the rest of the genera do. So, for my experiment, I had to make my own mass spectrometer using different like beakers or cylinders in which the leaves could transpire in. So in order to make sure that the leaf didn't have any air bubbles inside of it, I had to cut the stem of the leaf with a little razor while it was inserted in a bucket of water. And I also had to put the container in which I was going to put the leaf in inside the bucket of water. And then once I cut the stem, I put it in the container and took them out simultaneously so that no air could get in the leaf. And then after that, I put a layer of oil on top of the water to minimize evaporation. And I weighed the whole container and the leaf 3 hours, like right when I did the oil, and then 3 hours later. And then I would measure the change in grams, and I ended up turning that into like the transpiration rate in grams per second. And I did this for 11 species or 11 leaves of each of the species. And then for counting the effect of stomata and the effect of venation, I had to figure out the average stomata density per leaf. and then also the average number, or no, that number of primary and secondary veins per leaf, which took a long time because they have a lot, so I had to count them for all of them. And for the stomata density, I split it up into 4 parts and counted one of them and multiplied by 4. And in order to get a standardized density in terms of millimeters squared, I used a 400 time magnification and then multiplied the stomata density per visible view by 8 in order to get stomata per millimeter squared. And in order to get the leaf vein density, we used the leaf scan app, which Naomi helped me with, and scanned the surface area of the leaf, and then I divided the total number of veins by the surface area in millimeters squared. So for my results, I found that the transpiration rate, which I found in grams per second, I also standardized to be per millimeter squared. So I found Arthrosemma ciliata to be the species which had the highest transpiration rate per area, followed by Comostechia, followed by Moriri, and then that last bar over there is all the species combined. The standard deviation of transpiration rate between within Comostechia was also the highest. And then the average vein density per species was highest in Arthrosemma ciliatum, and then second highest in Comostechia or Stediana, and then third highest in Moriri exilvis. And this was interesting because if we go back to the transpiration rate graph, you could see that Arthrosemma ciliatum, which had the highest vein density, also had the highest transpiration rate. And then Comostechia, which was second highest vein density, had the second highest transpiration rate, and Moriri had the third highest vein density and third highest transpiration rate. So when I did regression analysis of the vein density versus transpiration rate, I found within the species, vein densities are very similar, so this could be why there was not that much significant data on vein density within the species affecting transpiration rate. But when I compared all of the species, I did find that there was a significant relationship between vein density and transpiration rate. However, if you could see by the R squared number that like the line of best fit on that graph isn't exactly perfect, but it was still significant data when I ran a test. And then to also address stomata density, I found stomata density per leaf, and stomata density was highest in Comostechia, and then in Arthrosemma, and then in Moriri. This was interesting because stomata density only showed to have a significant effect within the Comostechia leaves, but not within any of the other genera or between all of the species. So that was very interesting because I didn't find it to be significant. However, it could have been because when I plotted all the species, they have such different characteristics. It could have been due to some other factor. So the previous studies that I found have shown that higher vein density increases water transport in leaves and provides protection against herbivory, which is probably why if the water did transport faster within like leaves that have more veins, it could have been why in the 3 hours that I observed there was a higher transpiration rate for Arthrosemma. And also the rate of transpirational water loss is greater per unit of area in leaves with like smaller plant leaves. So that could be why Arthrosemma had the smallest leaves. That could be why the transpiration rate was also higher. However,
Arthur also had trichomes, which has been shown to reduce transpiration rates, so that's interesting. And I find this important to study, like vein density is something that has generally been used as a taxonomic identification tool, and it has been shown that like smaller leaves with a higher vein density are more drought resistant, and I think it's very important with climate change and like some areas increasing in aridity to know the effects of venation, and also just to be aware of which plants are more in danger to possible like extinction due to climate change. And so basically we need to know more, but I did find some interesting results. Oh, thank everyone. Naomi helped me with a lot, with the Leaf Scan app, with all my questions and my writing. Frank also helped me a lot with revising my paper, and Eladio helped me identify the species, so thank you. Yolanda made me lunch every day, and when I came home, I always had dinner. She was my homestay mom. Love her. Laurel helped me with my graphs. Mariah helped me edit my paper and just held my hand for 20 minutes to reduce my anxiety. And then the biological station, because I did my experiment there, and the institute, because I'm learning here. So thanks, everyone. What are your questions? Anna?
Do you think that the transpiration rates or like your results could have been different in like the leaves' natural environments versus in the lab?
Yeah, it could have been because like I only found the Morirru genus in very shaded areas. So that could have had an effect because when I was in the lab, I put them by the windowsill. They were all in the same condition. So yes, that could definitely have an effect.
Any other questions?
Mariah.
Were there any other genera that you were interested in studying during this? Yeah, what were they?
I didn't identify them, but I would like to have a lot more because it would be interesting. Yeah. Hi, Brandon. Oh.
Yeah, I guess you partly answered this already, you know, you're living in shaded areas. Are there like known ecological differences between these species that would suggest that some survive better in drier climates?
I don't know, but according to my research, maybe the best one would be the Arthurostemma, since it was the smallest and had the most veins. But I don't, Melastoma montesi only like occurs in the tropics, so I don't know because I only studied 3 species of Melastoma montesi. But yeah, it could be Arthurostemma if you were to put it somewhere.
I think there's kind of one more question.
Frank?
My question is about, you mentioned that veins can reduce herbivory, but I was wondering if venation also interfere with photosynthesis. In other words, taking up space that would otherwise be used for chloroplasts or whatever. So why don't plants have more veins? What are some of the costs of having veins?
I think it's like expensive, like energetically, to have more veins. I don't know, that's a good question. Maybe it's because it reduces the amount of stomata per leaf. But also the venation doesn't prevent herbivory, it just helps like water transport not be damaged by herbivory as much. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Our last speaker for today is Laurel Smith from UC Davis, and she's going to talk about orchid mycorrhizal.
colonization in gardens and natural environments in Monteverde, Costa Rica. So as you may already know, orchids are from the plant family Orchidaceae, which is an extremely diverse family. It has over 28,000 species total. And currently a large percentage of these species are threatened. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that a lot of these species have a low population size and limited distribution. And this limited distribution can in part be due to the symbiosis that orchids form with other species. So orchids form species-specific symbioses with both pollinators and mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizal orchids are called orchid mycorrhizal fungi, and they have this name because the relationship between orchids and the mycorrhizae is specific to orchid species. It's a really unique relationship. So for a little background information, mycorrhizae are a kind of fungi that form symbiotic relationships with plants. And there are a number of different types of mycorrhizae. This is just one of them. So typically the mycorrhizae live in the cortical cells of roots, which are like the outer cells, and they give nutrients to plants in exchange for sugars. So in orchids typically start off as what are called dust seeds, and they're called this because they literally look like dust. I mistake them for spores the first time I saw them, and because they're so small, they need the mycorrhizae in order to germinate. So they lack an endosperm in their early development, and they have to form this colonization with the mycorrhizae in order to go into later development. And because of this, they're called mycoheterotrophic, which means they fully rely on the mycorrhizae in order to develop. On the other hand, the mycorrhizae does not rely on the orchid seed, which is interesting, and which is why this is not necessarily called mutualism. So later on in development, orchids can still be mycoheterotrophic if they're non-photosynthetic and they don't produce their own sugars, or they can be facultative or non-mycoheterotrophic, which just means that they don't fully rely on the mycorrhizae, but they still can have them in their roots. Oh, and I just wanted to add, so when the seeds are developing, what they do is they consume what are called pelotons, and pelotons are basically just clumps of mycelium. So, obviously the symbiosis with the mycorrhizae is incredibly important. And so for this project, what I really was interested in studying is how translocation and moving the orchids to a different location, or how growth in a different environment that's not their native environment impacts the mycorrhizae. Because translocation into like orchid gardens or other places is a really common method of conservation for rare or threatened species. So that leads me into my question: how does orchid mycorrhizal colonization differ between, quote, natural and artificial environments? And for this experiment, my natural environment was a forest, and my artificial environment were orchid gardens. So for my methods, first I collected roots from 3 different locations. I looked at the orchid garden located in Santa Elena, the native garden outside of the Estación Biológica, and the forest also located next to the Estación. And I took 3 roots per plant, and I looked at 3 genuses overall. I then isolated the roots and then went through a thorough staining procedure, and what the staining did is it turned the mycelium and the pelotons blue so that I could look at them under the microscope. I then used a compound microscope to analyze roots for both colonization and pelotons. And it was pretty clear what the mycelium and pelotons looked like under the microscope. They were basically bright blue, which you can see here on the right. That's what a root looks like at 10 times and 40 times micropropagation, and the bright blue are the hyphae or the mycelium. So the 3 genera that I looked at were Oncidium, Maxillaria, and Pleurothallus. And I basically just picked these based on how abundant they were in the 3 environments. So in total, I looked at 102 total roots, and then I took 2 different samples per root. And then for the root analysis, in order to quantify the mycorrhizae, I looked at both colonization and peloton number. And for colonization, I used a percentage system from 1 to 5, 1 being basically there was no hyphae on the root, and 5 being that it was like pretty much completely covered. So for example, this one I probably would have set as a 4 on the bottom. And then the peloton number is pretty obvious, I just counted the number of pelotons. So here are my results. I first looked at average root colonization and pelotons just over the 3 environments, not split up by genus. And I found that there was significance overall between all three environments in average pelotons, but there was only significance between orchid garden and the two other environments in root colonization. So basically what that means is that over both of these, orchid gardens were significantly lower, and then native garden and forest were pretty much the same, looking at root colonization, but different looking at pelotons. And then split up by genus, I found almost no significant differences overall, except for in maxillaria, looking at the average pelotons. But what I thought was really interesting with these graphs is that the native garden tends to have more, both higher root colonization and higher peloton number overall, and that's the same in these graphs, which is kind of different than what I was anticipating. I thought that the native environment, the forest, would have the higher mycorrhizal load, but that wasn't necessarily what I found. Yes. And then I also looked at the proportion of each root colonization category across each genus. So if you remember, I quantified root colonization from a category of 1 to 5, and I wanted to see what the proportion of each category was across the different environments. So I think what's interesting here is that if you look at the maxillaria genus and the Pleurophalis genus, in the orchid garden environment, I think it's really obvious that the hyphae was a lot lower overall. So if you remember, 1s and 2s, which are the lighter colors, had lower hyphae on the roots. And then in the Oncidium genus, overall, there was a relatively even distribution, so a higher number of 4 and 5. That was pretty consistent across the three environments. So again, overall, the orchid garden had lower root colonization and peloton number, and the native garden and forest had pretty similar data across the board. So, and then when split by genus, there was relatively no significant differences. So to go back to my question, I did find that environments cause different amounts of mycorrhizae because orchid gardens had a lower mycorrhizae looking at both colonization and peloton number. So this does suggest that there was a weaker symbiosis between the plants found in the orchid garden in Santa Elena and the mycorrhizae. So why exactly? What does that mean? There are a number of different reasons that this could be the case. I think what would be really interesting to ask this study is to find out how the orchids were acquired to bring to the garden, because I think this would significantly impact the mycorrhizae later on in their life. For example, orchids can be asymbiotically germinated in their non-native environments. This means they're given the nutrients that they need from seeds, and they're able to germinate this way. And it's possible that some of the plants in the garden were propagated non-naturally, and that would definitely impact mycorrhizae later on in their life. Additionally, there could be a number of abiotic factors. For example, something that Frank suggested is that if there were different chemicals in the water in Santa Elena, for example, chlorine, used on the plants, this could impact the mycorrhizae, could kill off the mycorrhizae, and then things like moisture and temperature would also have an impact. And then the similarities in the native garden and forest could be due to proximity to the forest. So again, the environmental factors would be a lot more similar between those two locations than the garden in Santa Elena. So yeah, again, I think it'd be really interesting to add to the study how the orchid was acquired in the first place, and again, to add on some of those abiotic factors as well. So the importance of this study, as I mentioned earlier, mycorrhizae are necessary for orchids, so if you care about orchids, you should also care about mycorrhizae. And it's really important to understand how translocation impacts mycorrhizae. Translocation, again, is a common method for conservation for orchids, growing rare and threatened orchids in another location, and understanding this relationship can help to understand, how to do this successfully. So thank you to all of these lovely people. I could not have done it without you. Anyway.
I don't know if you already said this, but is every single species of orchid seed dependent on mycorrhizae?
Yeah, and I didn't mention this earlier, but also the species of mycorrhizae differs between different orchid species. and there's a lot of information lacking in that area, so it's hard to know exactly which mycorrhizae are going to be able to colonize which orchid species.
Do you have any guesses to why there were more pellet pots in the like natural garden versus the forest? Do you think it's because there's like more plants growing?
That's possible. I think part of it, so orchids do really well, like higher in the canopy with more light, and in the native garden environment, they were more exposed to light because the trees were a lot shorter versus in the forest, and I think this could possibly have to do with that, because the plants that we got from the forest were typically on like fallen branches. So yeah, that could be a possibility.
A related question, do you know if the prevalence of mycorrhizae or density of mycorrhizae is related to overall nutrients? And do you know if in the orchid garden, the folks who care for the orchids actually fertilize or the orchids there?
So for the first question, I think it's really difficult to generalize across all different species because the relationship varies a lot and the dependence of the orchids on the mycorrhizae varies a lot, but I did see in a number of papers that mycorrhizae could be a proxy for fitness of the orchids, which I thought was interesting. And then to answer your second question, I found out yesterday that they do not use fertilizer in the garden in San
This book is report around, right? Do you know any techniques for catching these spores, like sticky traps or something that, and is it usual to identify them sometimes when it is not in the roots?
Wait, sorry, can you say that again?
So this is a fungi that is covered to the roots, right? Is it usual to catch it and identify before it's part of the mycorrhizae, which before is associated?
That's interesting. I know that you can identify the mycorrhizae, but I'm not sure like before it colonizes the roots, if you'd be able to do that. That would be interesting though. I think identification of them is kind of a long and difficult process because you have to like grow them on plates and then like DNA sequence, yada yada yada. Yeah, that would be interesting. Thank you.
I'll try to be relatively quick. A quick consultation with my guardian angel, just a head nod or head shake is okay. If I stand back here and I take off my mask.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. So before students from another program disappear on us, just want to say thank you to the audience for coming and attending. It's super wonderful to share the results of these projects. It's even more fantastic to be able to share with folks who are engaged and listening and attentive. So thank you to the audience for coming and attending and participating. Also, this could go on and on and on, but just to say thank you to the Monteverde Institute for everything, for being the host institution, for dealing with some challenging times, for making this program go, to Irene for making this happen very fluidly. I'm going to throw in Catalina as well for making this the least problem-esque transfer of computers and all that. That was super awesome. And to all staff and for everything over the last, I say 10 weeks, but it's actually way more than 10 weeks. Thank you, Monteverde Institute. Looking at me, just as a reminder, one of the things that marks Costa Rica and Monteverde Institute in particular is to try to do simultaneous translation as a standard thing, not as a special thing. So Joyce Layton has been translating. Can be tricky to get some of these terms in English and even trickier to get them in Spanish. So thank you, Joyce. Also, a quick shout out to UC EAP, who got the EAP students here. You applied more than a year ago, perhaps. And wait, is that a head shake? No, not a year ago? Or when? So set me straight, Anthony. How long ago did you apply?
I applied after the deadline.
I don't believe that. But thank you to EAP for making this program happen and for continuing its mutualism with the Monteverde Institute. Thank you, EAP, if you're out there listening. I would also like to thank certain people who really made this go, including some resource people, including Eladio Cruz. Eladio, could you stand just for a second, please? So for those of you who don't know who Eladio is, he's a naturalist, cook, campesino, survived 2 snake bites, venomous snake bites, and is a plant expert, bar none, and really added a level of expertise to student projects that it's difficult to replicate. I would also like to thank sincerely my coworkers, Naomi and Federico, for helping this day happen, make these projects realize their potential and go beyond. I would also like to thank mi esposa, Katie, for helping in many, many ways. Also dealing with my last 2 weeks of being sort of trying to recover from my gastrointestinal turmoil. Thank you. Thank you, coworkers, and Katie and Eladio. Actually, before I go to the next person or set of people, I just want to point out for current students who happen to be 20, 24, if you would like to look into the future, I'm going to offer you an opportunity to look into the future and ask Debbie MacArthur just to stand, because Debbie MacArthur was a student here in spring 1994, and she has returned to Monteverde several times and is today with her daughter, Rania, and they're back here. So imagine coming back 26 years later with offspring. 28? Yes, 28. Yes, let me see if I can do that math. Yes. So it's awesome that Deb has come back, and you can talk to her at lunch and find out some of her insights. In those days, this building did not exist. It was a cow pasture. There's been some other changes, but some things that have been very much the same. So let me just quickly look at my little list here. So it's really 10 weeks ago when we first met each other. Do you remember that? Hotel Cox, 23 March. It was dry season. We never really know how it's going to go from the start. It's kind of like an athletic event. You just don't know who's going to win, what's going to happen. But I have been so impressed by the extent of the effort, and in Spanish it would be full entrega and full desempeño, like complete involvement in your projects, in these research projects. It is really, really impressive. And the presentations today were unilaterally really, really excellent, well done. We are so proud of you. Thank you for putting so much effort into this. We understand that not all of you are headed for a career in professional research, but you had the opportunity, as you expressed that you wish to do, to fully understand how to do research, what it's about, And I think in today's world, it's really important to know how some sectors of society gather information and learn about the world and learn about ourselves. I want to say a couple other things, and that is simply that also unilaterally, the projects were absolutely your own. And so there are no co-authors on your project, and staff might have helped and hopefully didn't get in your way, didn't make things more difficult for you, but you own your project. You own the ideas, you own the data, you own the interpretation, and it was really wonderful. It's a gift, really, to us. So I'd like to say again, thank you, and thank you for being here. Finally, you have a few more days in Costa Rica. Accept and internalize and look around you and reflect about what an extraordinary place and people Costa Rica is. When EAP students return to the United States, hopefully you will take some of that with you. And is this possible? I don't know if I'm going to say this on record. Turn the United States more into a place like Costa Rica. I will say that. And so there is lunch for symposium participants, and we're also kind of multitasking a little here. We're doing a homestay lunch for folks who hosted you in Monteverde, and those homestay families will come very soon, or at least some member of the family. Wahine people will see on Saturday, and Eladio is already here. So don't disappear. There's lots and lots of food. Yes? Okay. I think I'm done. Yes, I think I'm done.
All right, I want to echo all of Frank's thanks. I had a list going there, and Frank, I think you covered it quite well. I want to thank Frank. Frank, it is truly a pleasure to work with you. We've got to know each other better through this program. This is the longest running academic program of the Institute for many years under Frank's leadership. And like I said, it's a pleasure to work with you, and then also to see what comes out of projects in this program under your guidance is really impressive. I want to thank all of the students. These were your independent projects, and as Frank said, I see that each and every one of you really did the scientific method. I want to congratulate you for your results and the interpretation, but also for doing good science, in my opinion, in a larger sense, beyond just using the scientific method and being objective, appreciating all of the collaboration that ideally goes into it. I see genuine thanks to your colleagues and the leaders of the program, your homestay families, and that's really encouraging, especially in the world today. So thank you for all you've brought as individuals and as scientists. Thank you for inspiring me to think and observe more. I've been sitting here watching this nest up here and watching both parents come to it. And I think a little more deeply about that thanks to the earlier presentation, just as one small example. So thank you, and come back and visit us. Thank you in advance for being ambassadors for this program. And I hope to see you back here again someday.